exploring small moments of lasting impact. It's the Atomic Jolt podcast with your host, Martin Cartledge.
Kadrick is now, I would consider a good friend of mine, and we met working at a company. We both got hired around the same time,
we did
2018.
A few months apart, I think.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so we worked together, and we there was good times and there was bad times there, and now we're on to better things.
Yeah, we're better for it.
Yeah, experiencing life. Yeah, the ups and the downs. But I'm glad you were there. Anyways, dude, I watched Coming to America last night. I've seen it. I was trying to think of that last night because I showed Kristen it the first time, last summer. Because I watched it, probably within the last 6 months or so.
Sure.
And because I don't know, just the way she was brought up or whatever, just 80s Eddie Murphy movies weren't on the radar. Arsenio Hall movies were on the radar. It's that's fine. But man, it's a great movie. I'm glad you picked it.
Yeah. I felt that honestly, it in my opinion is considered Black culture sort of canon in a sense, right? You may be going throughout your day-to-day, or just maybe once or twice throughout your year you'll hear a reference from that movie and you don't even know, you don't immediately recognize, or you do, right? Almost that I was doing the other day. I was watching ESPN, right? Because I'm 30 plus, and there was the announcer was talking about, they were going over footage from the Golden State Warriors, right? And Klay Thompson, right? Lights out. So the announcer was he quoted from the movie. It's just well, his mama named him Klay, so I'm gonna call him Klay, right? Just
I literally, in my notes I have right here, Klay or Muhammad.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know, it's especially in the Black community, I feel you get to a certain age where you just know these things in passing, right? Maybe obviously for the newer generation, this isn't something that's going to be on their radar, right? You talk about late 80s Eddie Murphy, Arsenio, right? You just know these things, man, whether or not you realize it or not, from that movie.
Sure. So you basically were born and raised in Charlotte, right?
So I was born in North Carolina, this town called Monroe. So it's about 40 minutes south of Charlotte, or southeast. And I was raised in a smaller town across the state line in South Carolina. So,
okay. Yeah. And when was the first time you saw Coming to America?
So to be honest, it's very fragmented, right? Because after a while, I think you've seen a movie so many times that you just remember bits and pieces of where you were with certain parts of the movie. And I don't actually recall. Dude, 6th to 7th grade below is a complete blur.
Yeah. I feel that.
Yeah. So
100%.
Yeah, no, they're sort of scenes that I sort of recall, mostly down my grandmother's, is where I feel I watched that movie the most. Yeah, that's it. I don't.
So you feel
Go ahead.
So you feel your grandma was the one that kind of introduced it to you, inadvertently, or was it did she sit you down and say, "This movie's awesome"? How did that happen?
I'm pretty sure.
Or do you just
I'm pretty sure there was a milder version of it on TV. Yeah, I'm pretty sure my grandmother could have cared less about that. She was always driving somewhere. But yeah, dude, I don't actually recall, what sort of moment happened where, it's hey, here's this thing, watch it. Right? It was just something I encountered.
Yeah, it was there.
Yeah, feels like a rite of passage almost.
Do you feel that way?
A little bit. There's certain things, movies, you just culturally you just have to see, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in your family, is it kind of revered in your family? Does everyone like that movie in your family, would you say?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. I think mostly between me and my older sister, because I think the middle child, so my youngest sister, she doesn't necessarily care about movies like that at all. But yeah, certainly there's been several references my older sister and I have made from that movie. It's just it's
Yeah.
such an easy movie to do, you know?
Yeah, I think Eddie Murphy is that way though. Like the way I actually didn't know until watching it last night that he wrote the story for it. I just thought it was another movie he was just in.
Yeah. So I don't know as much about Eddie Murphy. I can't even say that I was a super fan of his work, but I know he actually hit the scene. I think for Saturday Night Live in like the super early '80s. And so by the time this movie was out, I think he had actually started to develop a pretty seasoned movie career. But yeah, that's I don't know, that's kind of, again, I think it just kind of happened in passing.
Yeah. Well, so you say that it's almost like black canon. I want to go into that a little bit more. Like why do you feel that way? Is it like do you feel like parts of that movie you're like, yeah, that's what it's like growing up, or is it like just go into that? I'm curious.
Sure. So to me, excuse me, there were parts of that movie that were just sort of absurdly awesome. And it really painted a different light of us, I think, right? There was just this hyperbolic notion of wealth, and this sort of like kingdom, right? Yeah, and yeah, I don't know, dude. Trying to actually, yeah, I don't know.
So the way I saw it was at least the way I saw like the movie was like written and how it was probably meant to be kind of perceived was like Akeem is brought up in Zamunda and it's like this over the top almost like jungle like aborigines kind of like almost like too like it's playing it up a lot,
Yes.
like way over the top,
Right.
even with like the rose petal stuff. He was like, Dad, come on,
Yes.
like I'm sick of the rose
The
petals,
rose
like I want to,
bearers.
yeah, like I'm sick of it. And like the another one of my things in my notes is like an orchestra in his room, you know, when he wakes up. It's like
That's
everything is just completely, like you said, hyperbolic and like way overblown.
that scene gets me
And
every
then
time, by the way.
yeah, and it's like him and what's his Arsenio Hall's the character, I'm totally blanking. Semmi.
Semmi, yeah.
And they go and they pick like queens just because of like, you know, their background of royalty, and they're like, oh, how bad could
A
it
king
be?
needs
You know,
a
queens in
queen,
the
right?
80s. Right. And then they go and it almost feels like it was deliberately, you know, queens in the 80s, which, you know, wasn't great. And it was like pretty like polarizing from where they came from in the movie. And it almost felt like obviously he was aware of what he was doing, but it was like a narrative around, you know, black communities in Queens in the 80s. And that's how it was. And that's where you could see the real side of like black culture and how life was. And it wasn't like what, being like in this like fictional, overblown kind of like African paradise.
And I think that hyperbolic aspect of it is what made it really stand out, because a lot of the movies of my youth were very almost like serious, like street perspective type of movies, and this was one of the first movies that I had watched sort of in blacks, with, you know, largely perceived as black cinema. It just felt like a nice refreshing perspective. Honestly, it's ridiculous, but I think in the midst of it being so outlandish, it sticks with you, right? Especially as something that's not familiar to any of us, really, in that regard. And then, we mentioned the opening scene there. It's one of those things that get me thinking, where it's just like you mentioned you watched it recently, so you watched that movie today and you're just like, whoa, this would never fly today. There are too many people who don't have the palate for this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know, man. You cherish those movies too, because they, with today's sort of like undertones, they, you can't expect stuff like this to come back.
Sure. And okay, so that's interesting, because I think of a lot of shows and movies that it's like under the 2022 lens, you're like, yeah, no, this would never make it past like the pitch of a script. There's no way. And I don't know. I think you could have some pretty different opinions, and I think in some regards it's probably a good thing. But I think in other cases, to me, without like blowing the roof off, just what I was thinking about was there's so, especially with social media. I mean, the '80s there wasn't social media, so I think just like the whole like the landscape of the culture was obviously very different, and the way we interpreted news and how we got news and like pop culture was just completely different. Whereas now, something like that would just be like, there'd be so much virtue signaling online, and they would just be just completely canceled in before it even hit theaters. Right. And so on one end, it's like I think the movie is great, and like I mean culturally, I mean everything, all the undertones, a lot of lessons it has in there. I mean the writing, I think it's a super important movie, and it's like timeless. But in the same respect, I don't want to say like, oh, all movies should still be, under the same thing. And I don't think like being held accountable I think that's bad. So it's that middle ground. But I think obviously this movie does not fall under the umbrella of, oh, this should be reined in. I think it was great.
Yeah, agreed.
But it does say something interesting about the culture today and how it might have been, digested by the common person.
Right.
Going to a theater.
Sometimes I wonder if what changed was the elements of the sort of these movies and the expectations gradually change, or if it's just people's tolerance to various aspects of it being presented, kind of the chicken or the egg thing, right? But yeah, I totally agree. I think that we will cherish these movies, right? And I think in a sense, I don't know if you necessarily support, especially certain aspects about it being recreated, right? It fit that time, and if you can stomach it for that time period, cool, you go for it. If not, that's fine, So, in the midst of some of that just being very kind of sketchy for today's audience. There was a lot of good meaning in there too. I think a lot of stuff that I feel like I kind of hold today. Like for instance, let's see, the storyline was supposed to be more endearing, right? It's it's this guy. He is the freaking prince of Zamunda. He doesn't want to just be given a wife, right? He's sort of, that lifestyle has become a little monotonous to him. He just, right, and so goes to the most random place in Queens in New York, right? To then lesser himself to find a potential queen to accept him in that lesser form, right? And it's I think I carry some of that as well, because like I've my current girlfriend, I've been with her for 10 plus years, right? And even till this day, I don't really dress nice. It's like, hey, you accepted me like this, right? I know there's no hypergamy involved. There's
if the video of this ever gets released, people are just gonna call bullshit on this immediately because you look great.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. This is an attempt at looking presentable, Martin. It is
well, you did well.
Thanks. I appreciate that. So yeah, I don't know. Although again, certain elements wouldn't fly today. I do feel like largely it had a pretty solid meaning to it. I don't know as to why it's stuck around so long in like our community. I don't know. But you again, it's an easily quotable movie. You recognize certain aspects of it, whether you immediately realize it or not. What's the Nas song? The part where he's just like, he sings "She's My Queen."
Yep. I also have that quote that just says, "She's your queen." I have that in a quote.
Oh, you can do a better job than that, Martin.
No, I'm not going to try it. Absolutely not. I did that in the most like monotone, like I'm just writing this completely meta. I'm saying it to you meta.
Yeah, but no, it's just like certain like that. There was the Soul Glow commercial always sticks with me. You never forget the Soul Glow commercial, dude. I'm trying to think of other aspects about that movie. Oh, and obviously sort of this was the first time James Earl Jones sort of like etched his voice into my brain, right? And then, things like Star Wars, which for me was later in life, when it was revealed to me that was actually him, it was just like a crazy moment for me. And then there were other times like Mufasa, right? So you slowly recognize it, just like, that's my guy. That's my guy.
Right.
So yeah.
So
go ahead, man.
No. So you're talking about how these lessons of like, I think what the movie's obviously trying to drive home is he just wants to do his own thing, pave his own way, not have things just given to him. He just wants to like cut out his corner of the world per se, and have someone that wants to spend time with him because of him, not because of circumstances or whatever else comes with it. Just his personality, I guess. Right. I mean, did you pull that out like that, I guess that lesson or that kind of thought like early on, or was that something that you just reflected on and that's just something that stood out when you liked the movie?
It was definitely in reflection. I don't recall many movies that, that early that I have seen throughout my life that sort of went down the same route, right? Because again, a lot of movies then didn't really portray Black people as this nation of wealth, right? And yeah, I don't know. Definitely something that I reflected back on. And you think about how you carry yourself today, which obviously, like, Van is like 10 times more attractive than me, and accepted this form, not this form, but my hoodie and sweatshirts, and sweatpants. So yeah, dude, I don't know. It obviously, I can't say that as I think about that attribute about myself, that this is the absolute thing, but I can tell you it was the first time that I had seen something of it. And I do feel that it affected me in a way.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times, especially when you just, watch a movie or listen to an artist or whatever early on, I feel like our brains can't even like comprehend like the deep, like rooted, like, ethic, like stitching or life lessons, because you haven't really lived that much of life. So you don't know what you don't know, kind of. But it makes it all the better when you like can reflect on it and be like, man, I had good taste. That movie's really good. And it turns out it's got a lot of stuff that I can pull out of it now and be like, yeah, that's great. Yeah. I can reflect on that. Was there anything else in the movie that you can reflect on and you feel like is applicable to your life or your family's life or whatever?
That's definitely the largest theme. There was this sense of sort of like, king, queen, prince, right? So I grew up in a 2-parent household, and a lot of the movies that I had seen at the time were sort of portraying these very street sort of perspectives. And I don't come from that background. I never lived that. And so I would say there was an element about this movie where like this strong family, father wants best with son, mother cares for son. That part is really familiar to me. And I don't know how prevalent that is amongst other people who've seen this movie. But yeah, those are the two biggest relatable moments I feel, is that sense of family and sometimes them wanting to make choices for you because it is in your best interest. Yeah, I don't know. Personally, the again, the endearing part of just finding love at your lower form is not to be too cheesy there, but
Yeah. So I'm going to take that in two different ways, but the first one is, so the dynamic of mom, dad wanting obviously what's best for their son, maybe overdoing it. You felt like certain aspects of that in your life with your mom and your dad obviously just wanting the best for you. Was that like something that was throughout your like whole childhood, of you kind of felt like Eddie Murphy's character in some regard? And so you're like, obviously, I don't know if you lived in a palace or had like rose petal people. I don't know if you ever had to call them off, but I mean, was there like a degree of relatability there in his character at all?
Only a little, especially around the
Mm-hmm.
early stages of seeing it. And it's my parents weren't super strict parents. I was the youngest child, so by the time it got to me, it was just like do good in school.
Uh-huh.
So my
Yeah.
sister probably had to bear most of that burden. Um, but certainly these aspects of they were never involved in my love life. To be honest, I don't think they ever would have thought I'd get this far in my love life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, definitely there were times where they were overbearing with their opinions and what they felt that I should do. And you know, it was good intention. Like my dad, for instance, we're from a small town. And he would tell me, "I don't care what you do in life, just get out of here," right? And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes the military was even suggested, right? And it's like, I don't want to go to the military. I want
Yeah.
to do computer stuff.
Right.
Right. So just stuff like that.
Right. Talk about having like a longtime girlfriend. Did you ever pull out parts of that whole relationship in Coming to America? Because you talk about how your girlfriend, puts up, air quote, with how you dress and kind of how you are and like sees the real you and everything else like that. Did you feel, do you reflect on that often, or do you, as you were growing up, were you like, that's how I want to approach, having like finding like love and a companion is I don't want, I want her to like me for me, like that kind of thing.
Right. So in the early sort of like phases, you're a kid coming up through your adolescence and you're a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
you go through hormonal things. Um, Certainly at that time I could see, I don't know, it feels like when you're a teenager, you just see other people doing stupid things.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at that and you say whether you want that for yourself or you don't. And there were probably silly teenager things that I thought that I wanted that I absolutely didn't. But by the time I had started to get into my late teens, I recognized that relationships are sometimes mutually beneficial in the worst ways.
Mm.
And I don't want that. And I think that if you can find someone that's like, I've been through ups and downs, right, in my life. She's been there through all of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really nice. It's nice to know that, if you met me at a really successful point in my life, and that's something you always sort of hedged your bets on with me, and I stumbled one day, I didn't necessarily have that, or I didn't exhibit that thing that you knew to be. How would you react in that moment? Would you build me up? Would you leave? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely, as I was getting older, late teens, I realized, and also just remembering some divorce rumors throughout my family and stuff, like really good dudes who just tried to do the right thing, and
Mm-hmm.
still their relationship ended in some really awful way. And you get more news, and it does become more and more about money and
Mm-hmm.
status, and I didn't want that, right? So I think that's why she and I have been together for so long. It's just not, the expectation hasn't changed from what we first knew of each other, when we first met. So yeah, I think that's something I'll always carry with me. I'm not going to put on a fancy suit to impress a potential partner. I'm not going to do any of that. Like, we can have
Mm-hmm.
conversation. If you think I'm cool, go further. But that's it, man.
Yeah. Well, I like that. Just being like true to yourself and stripping away all of like the gift wrap and all like the shiny exterior, just kind of material stuff. Do you, if you're planning on having kids, I'm interested. Are you like planning on like showing them this movie and kind of like, because it sounds like it was an important part of like your life in some way, shape, or form. Is this something that you would pass down to your kids?
Um, I think it's something that through cultural experience and maybe through just throughout the years that the kid, somehow serendipitously stumbles upon this movie. I don't think it'll be something that I I cast upon them, right? As I
Mhm.
mentioned, a rite of passage. I don't mean I
Yeah.
don't mean that strictly, but just culturally, you just kind of run into these things. As you get older, you hear references to like this movie, for instance, and I don't know, it really strikes you, I think. So I don't think that I'll say, here, do this, here, watch this movie. Um, I know, for instance, like with Star Wars, it becomes like a family thing, right? Oh, the kids would love this. Let's have them watch this. But I
Mhm.
think throughout me just doing what I do, I'll watch that movie again. And if I have kids and they're around, maybe they can watch that movie too.
Yeah, it'll be like influenced through osmosis of you just doing it. So it's interesting by you mentioned like kind of like this loose rite of passage and it's like a cultural thing that you kind of just pick up on. How do you think the the cultural landscape has changed since the late 80s until now, and let's say when your kids are around, like how different it'll be?
Ooh. Hmm.
Or even like let's think about the late 80s when the movie was released, when you were being raised, let's say in like the late 90s, and then when you have kids in the 2020s perhaps.
Sure. Um, I don't know, man. I think that it's I do well, and I think that I have to be careful how I frame this, but I think that at a certain point, that it becomes more unfamiliar, and I don't know, it becomes something that you can't necessarily relate to. But also, I do feel like there are aspects of the movie that will sort of traverse time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but to be honest, I can't be sure, because there are some parts of that movie that at a certain age I wouldn't want my kid to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as they get older, um, I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I
Yeah, and it's something where what I think is so important about these types of movies, just like just one thing out of several things I can just pull out of right out of the top, is it's a celebration of like Black culture and being proud of where you're from. And it's like I also really 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 admire that obviously Eddie Murphy, Arsenio Hall, John Amos, all these actors are super super talented. But the way that it's written and the way it's acted, I mean, the fact that I mean they Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall like do caricatures of different like parts of culture, and it isn't in a way a negative way. It's in a way of like acknowledging that's part of culture and that's a part of life, and they do it in such a tasteful, genuine way that it's like they're not doing something for like a cash grab or like sell a bunch of tickets. You can tell that they want to just it's just a celebration of culture
Yeah,
and like their life,
sure.
and they want to just show that, um which I think elements to that's probably why I think the movie is timeless in a lot of regards, because I don't know, at least let's think in the last 10 years it's been superhero movies and remakes.
Yeah,
You look back at movies like this and it was completely unapologetic and honest about,
yeah,
it was in an accessible way, of course, to where a lot of people could just watch it. But I think a lot of the undertones are super important, and that's what makes it
yeah,
timeless.
yeah. And sure, I agree. There are plenty of timeless aspects about the movie, but occasionally, right, when a generation becomes detached from the original thing, what do? They remake it, and or
Ah,
they make a two, and that's what they did with this movie, which I heard wasn't very good, and I didn't bother to see because I didn't like the fact that they made a two.
I'm glad you felt that way because I didn't even put it down in notes, but I actually forgot that they made a second one. I felt the same way whenever I saw that it was coming out. I remember thinking like, oh, I don't. The first one is like perfect. I don't think this is gonna be good.
And then
So I was curious about like what you thought about it, but if you didn't
I
see
didn't
it and
watch.
you're like, no, I'm
Yeah,
good.
no, I just sometimes it's just gratuitous. Like Jumanji, right? Why would you remake
Mhm.
that movie? Don't do that.
Yeah,
And then the remake's
I agree.
bad, right? And so you oftentimes get a watered down version of the original thing, which is
Hmm.
no bueno, man.
Yeah, there's a part of my morbid curiosity that wants to throw it on just because I watched the original again last night and just like, all right, let's roll with this. Let's see what happens. But I feel like it's just going to bum me out. And I'm like, dang, and I wish I could just erase that.
And I don't know, man. People get older and trying to reprise the same roles, and sometimes it just doesn't always work. I get there's the nostalgia behind it, but doesn't mean it always works.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. So I have a couple like kind of like speed round is questions that are you don't have to necessarily answer super fast, but I like pulled out of some of them from the movie. They're all related to the movie, but I'm curious. So would you rather eat at a McDonald's or a McDowell's?
Big Mac over Big Mac for sure. Stop it.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a softball. Even when I watched it, I was like, man, I wish I could eat that right now. So you mentioned not being a huge Eddie Murphy fan, like per se, but let's say, he has a lot of side characters and a lot of things he plays himself. Do you have any that stand out to you as like kind of your favorite?
Donkey from Shrek.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Man, I always forget he's in Shrek.
Don't forget.
He's the best part about Shrek.
That's
though.
right.
Man, I gotta rewatch Shrek now. That's so good. Okay, so let's say you had to hang out with just one. Who would you rather hang out with, Akeem or Semmi?
Akeem knew how to have a good time. He was bored with the fancy stuff. Semmi
Right.
was spoiled. It was a lot of brattiness going on, and I couldn't deal with that. He had to go back.
That's a good. So yeah, that's interesting because I was watching it last night as I was writing that, and my answer kept changing throughout the movie. At first, I was like, yeah, I mean Akeem, duh, like he's the one that's like, just trying to get back to his roots, just trying to just have a good time, find his own way. But then when Semmi would put in things like a hot tub and do all this stuff in like his apartment, I was like, I don't know, like that. He also like has had a life of luxury, so he knows what is the good stuff.
And
but I guess Akeem would too.
They're going right back to it though. Like there was just all of this complaining. It's like, dude, we are rich.
That's true. That's true. I mean, even at the end, towards the end, when spoiler alert. Hopefully, if you've gotten this far, you've seen the movie. But
right.
even at the end, when he like leaves a note and he's like, "Yeah, like see ya. Like I'm staying at this hotel. Like peace."
Yeah.
Like he was kind of like a bad friend. Yeah. So yeah, you know what? Yeah, it's like solidly Akeem for me too.
Yeah, for sure.
So Zamunda or Queens, New York, where would you go if you had to pick? And let's say it isn't Zamunda at the beginning when like, let's say you have like, you can bring your family and your girlfriend and stuff. This isn't like you're by yourself and you're miserable in Zamunda.
Is it still 1988?
Oh man, it can be whatever year you want. There's so many levels to this question. The year doesn't matter. It can be whatever you would prefer.
I'm gonna say, obviously a mythical nation versus not. But I've been to Africa. I've been to South Africa, which is probably like the least African experience you could get in certain ways. But I would choose Zamunda, man. I think I want to see that level of extravagance. I can see a Queens. I don't know, but
yeah, that's a good point. I think I said to myself it would probably be New York, but that's because I haven't been to New York.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, that would be cool. And I want to go in the 80s just because I think like that time just, I don't know, it just seemed cool. Like I like it ironically because there was less technology and it seemed just more, I don't know, like experiencing a real city.
Oh, dude, like Queens in the 80s, just I don't know, it feels like the US in the 60s. It just doesn't feel safe anywhere. Sorry.
That's fair. I think I would say that until like a taxi like dropped me off, like, all right, here you go. Then I think I would immediately be like, shit, I want to go to Zamunda. Yeah. And having like pet elephants and stuff, like that would be pretty sick.
Yeah.
So yeah, I swayed again. I think I would pick Zamunda too.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I'm not sure if you have plug stuff, but I always ask people if they have plugs or things that they want to mention that they do or whatever.
No
pressure though.
Yeah, no. I don't know. Martin's a good buddy of mine. Met at a previous job, and now we're doing really awesome things in life. that's my quick thought.
And then I'm glad you did this. So it's been fun.
Yeah, for sure, man. This has been a good time.
Thanks again, Kadrick, for joining the show. It was good to catch up and talk about Zamunda for a little while. If you enjoyed the show and you're interested in supporting the show a little bit more, you can leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. If the podcast platform of your choice doesn't have reviews, you can follow us. That's probably the best way to support. If you're on social media and you're interested in following us on that, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Atomic Jolt Pod. That's Atomic Jolt POD. Thank you so much again for listening, and we'll see you next time.